Thank you, Sebastian, and welcome to Vacant Property Committee. And we're going to go ahead and convene with an virtual announcement. Ms. Nicole, thank you for joining us tonight and for helping us to run the meeting. Can you share the virtual announcement for the group?
Sure. I'll also take roll after that, if that's fine with you.
Yes, ma'am. Thanks, Nicole.
This meeting is being held as an electronic meeting pursuant to and in compliance with Richmond City Council's Ordinance 2020-093, adopted April 9, 2020, and extended by Ordinance number 2020-183, adopted August 20, 2020, and by Ordinance number 2020-232, adopted December 14, 2020, and the school board's resolution approved on April 20, 2020. The meeting notice also stated that the meeting would be a virtual meeting and would be live streamed for the public on the school division's Facebook page, and the link was provided. Information on how individuals needing translation services could obtain the service was published on Board Docs. The agenda of the meeting was also posted to Board Docs. After roll call, we will state how many board members are participating at the time of the roll call. Mr. Young, would you like me to read to see who the committee members are who are currently present?
Yes, ma'am, please. Thank you.
Mr. Young.
Present.
Ms. Burke. Ms. Page. Ms. Rizzi.
Here.
Mr. Pancham. Mr. Rumrell.
Here.
Mr. Williams. Mr. McClellan.
Here.
Mr. Gio. As of right now, there are 2 board members present, Mr. Young.
Thank you, Ms. Thompson. And Ms. Burke will be joining us momentarily. She had another obligation specifically with Ms. Newbill, but anticipate will be arriving momentarily. And then Ms. Page the same, had another obligation, but advised that she'll be joining when she does. And I think I saw our superintendent is on the phone call. Jason, thanks for being here. And our chief of staff, Michelle Hudasco.
Hey, everybody.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Hi.
Thanks all. So first, for the purpose of the agenda this evening, we are going to continue conversation that we initiated at the last meeting, specifically relevant to Narell and to Clark Springs. And I thought that perhaps we could initiate tonight with Narell. There were a couple, if I recall correctly, a couple of additional questions. You'll recall at the last meeting we talked about Narell Annex. But this evening, we are going to discuss Narell and if there are any additional properties. But and I'm sorry, I didn't share. I also saw Bobby Hathaway on the call. Bobby, how are you, sir?
I'm good. Hello, Johnson.
Hey, hello. Bobby, if perhaps you could just provide us with a very brief reminder relevant to the Narell property. I know we discussed it along with Narell Annex last time, but just maybe a 30-second synopsis of the Narell property.
Oh, Jonathan, I got to get it in front of me, Jonathan. I don't have it right up yet, so hold on for a second.
Yeah, and while Bobby's pulling that up, are there any questions related to Narell that we can begin the conversation around? Well, while we're pulling that, while Bobby's pulling the information, Michelle, at the last meeting, you spoke to briefly our personnel, RPS personnel located in the building at Narell. Can you remind us approximately who that is, what that looks like, how many persons, what departments?
Yeah. So right now, folks that are over at Narell are the safety and security team, the principal the ones that are kind of more centralized. There's obviously folks in schools. Our principal directors kind of have home base there. Those are the folks who supervise principals. There is a subset of the Head Start team there that were moved there from Ruffin Road previously. We also house our teacher store there, as well as different driver education things. We are looking to expand our central office use of Norrell as we think of ways to not have quite so many folks in City Hall. And so that is something that we're working on now in conjunction with the Clark Springs property about how to better utilize both the Norrell space and the Clark Springs building. So I would expect more from us on these two properties in the coming weeks or months, but I'll certainly say from an administration perspective, because we are looking to use these for staff. I know this isn't always a space for recommendations, but it would be our recommendation to maintain these two properties as a way to support central office staff.
Thank you. Thank you, Michelle. That's super helpful, really valuable information. Are there any questions for Michelle relevant to what she just shared? Michelle, do you have, and perhaps this is premature to ask this question, but do you have any sense of how many persons we anticipate there may be an interest in locating there in the building? I mean, are we talking about like 10 people, or is it like 50 people? Or?
Yeah, much more than that. We're actually looking to back map off of City Hall. So one of the real challenges for City Hall for staff is parking. We only have a very limited number of parking spaces under the building, and then we have a very limited number of spaces at a lot right across from the courthouse. I'd say between those two, we get 70 spaces total. And so what we'd like to do is actually have that number of folks work out of City Hall so that folks don't have to pay for parking garages and other things if they're not one of the selected folks to get a parking space, which can also often cause some morale and equity concerns, although we've done our best work to try to standardize who gets those spaces. So I would expect between Clark Springs and Norrell, we actually hope to house somewhere probably between 100 to 200 staff members across the two locations. Right now, we are doing assessment of what the rooms look like. Most of them can easily get 4 or more desks in the room, different configurations, standing desks, sitting desks. So it's really more anchoring it backwards that way. And we're doing some assessments then of what might be needed in these two buildings in terms of any possible network upgrade or, basic operational elements like making sure there is a copier there. I think, again, one of the real appeals, not only at parking for staff, but for new employees or school-based folks. So thinking of the talent office, for example, and folks that need to come in for paperwork or fingerprinting, it can be a real impediment to come in through City Hall. So that's some of our rationale for looking to expand out.
That's super helpful. Thank you. Are there questions? Stephanie, yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I just have a question. I don't know if I'm jumping the gun on this, but is there any plan for the fields that surround Clark Springs?
¿Hay algún plan para
Not yet. Ooh, Eric, I can hear you, just so you know. I'm not sure if that means you can, if I'm talking over you too. Not yet, but there's a really nice field at both Clark Springs and at Norrell. To be honest, the only thing that we've been looking at both of those buildings right now, and actually, Jonathan, this goes a little bit to the Norrell Annex as I was walking by it the other day, is possible repurposing of playground equipment there, just as we're thinking of some of our Other buildings, being able to swap out some of those pieces, but don't have a comprehensive strategy plan or any identified funding for the athletic fields at this
Pero
point.
no tenemos un plan comprensivo estratégico.
Stephanie, did you have a follow-up to that?
No, I was just curious about what might happen. You know, it's in my district, it's up the street from my house, and I'd like to, like, you know, my kid is 16 and probably could use some like more field space to do things. And I just wondered if there was any plan for that. You know.
At the at Norrell, so with that between you and Bobby, can you share it? Do we need all the land? Presumably we would increase the size of the parking lot. Would we need to provide for additional parking at Norrell?
I don't think so. There's a lot there, plus there's street parking, but we haven't quite mapped out the number of folks that are there. And for some of the folks that will be housed there, it's more of a home base versus potentially a daily location. So for example, the principal directors, while that's their home base office, they are 99% of the time out observing in schools. So I'm not sure even if every day the full parking capacity would be needed. But we should have some more information for both Norrell and Clark Springs, I would say, within the month, and then can kind of check and make sure parking would look good, since that's a primary driver.
And I don't want to monopolize all the time. I do have a couple other questions, but I want to defer to other folks on the call. Any other questions for Michelle?
I'm not sure if this is for Michelle or Bobby or maybe both. I'm wondering if like 3 to 5 years or further down the road, if the space would be used a little bit more efficiently. I know that the Park Service has about 5 acres across the street. So if it's possible to work that out together, it's really just a lot of land, and it is a 1-story. And I know it'd be really putting the cart in front of the horse to build an office building there before, you know, the schools have been worked on. I'm just thinking, you know, is that a thought that at some point later, you know, you could maybe sell a chunk of the land and then put up a multi-story building that has more efficient parking, and it could be a win-win.
I don't think that's immediate thinking. We were more in a short-term solution space because, as you mentioned, we probably have some schools we'd want to build first before we built an office building. But I think by just naming through this committee that we want to maintain the property, you know, leaves options open for the years to come. But I defer to Jason if there's any other thought that he would say around that.
I got other stuff I got to build right now, so I'm focused on, on that for the meantime.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, Richard did kind of, I think he kind of stole some of what I was thinking. Really, part of the impetus for my question around the parking, if there was any opportunity, and I guess now we're talking about both properties, but if there was any opportunity to subdivide either of those properties. I know next we're going to talk about Clark Springs, and that's a considerable amount of area, and not for RPS to retain and develop, but for the city to consider working with somebody for single family residences, for example. But that's probably well, I guess my question would be, is that even viable, considering what the administration is prepared to propose for either of those sites?
You're talking about Norrell, or you're talking about Clark Springs?
I think probably more for Clark Springs, just because that's a larger of a property. If I'm not 5.8 acres, and maybe that's just not relevant at all. I'm just thinking out loud.
I mean, like my preference on the Clark Springs property is that we retain it in full in the RPS portfolio. I think we're going to need the space one way or the other, either for offices or for eventual as a school space. And so I would be wary of subdividing that property and kind of hamstringing us for the future. So that one I would squarely say we should, my recommendation at this point would be to maintain that in the RPS portfolio.
Got it.
So-
No, that's
Jonathan, this is Dawn.
oh yes, yeah. Thank you. Thanks for being here. I shared with everybody that you had another obligation to be joining us shortly. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, so I totally, I concur with what the superintendent is saying, because Clark Springs has been used as a holding space for our children, our students. So I support the recommendation of what the superintendent just stated.
Thank you, Dawn. And thanks for, I know you had another obligation. Thanks for being here tonight. And gosh, I'm looking at it now. Of the two properties, the Clark Springs is actually the smaller. Norrell looks like is nearly 10 acres. The same, any thoughts on that property, the same conversation?
I mean, I'm more open to opportunities there, given how residential that area is.
Right.
I would need to spend more time kind of looking at the site map and kind of understanding that a little bit better. I didn't have in my mind that it was that large a site.
Paul, are you able to weigh in on that? I don't know if you have anything you can share relevant to Norrell. I'm inquiring about.
As far as I know on Norrell, my understanding, I mean, a lot of the site is used for sports fields, and I believe I understood there's a football league that plays there, a neighborhood football league, and I'm not sure what other, maybe there's baseball, softball, I'm not sure. But Parks and Rec, I think, manages some of that, I believe, but. And I know that there's some adjacent property that we acquired back when the flooding happened in the neighborhood in 2005, and the ordinance that was approved to acquire that property says that it was to be used for expansion of Battery Park for parks and recreation type functions. So I think the long-term plan is to use what open space we have potentially for sports programs.
Very, very good. So there's really, to subdivide that property for single family residences really went comport with what the city's long-term plan is right there anyhow, sounds like.
I mean, if Parks and Rec had another solution for sports fields in the neighborhood, it could be an opportunity for some additional affordable housing. But until we get some confirmation that they have another site where they could field these sports programs, we're probably not going to do anything with that.
Right, because also, this is Dawn again, just to add to that conversation, we have limited green space in the city. So a lot of Parks and Rec association, the sports association, utilize that land for that purpose. And so again, we have limited green space in the city, and we need to maintain as much green space that we can for our students and our families.
Well said, well said. What other questions? Are there any additional questions and or comments relevant to either Norrell or Clark Springs, since we've been talking about both.
So Jonathan, I have a question, and I may
Yes,
have missed this. Have we received any feedback from the city regarding the surplus properties with the quitclaim deed? What is the status?
Yeah,
Maybe superintendent cameras
thank,
can provide an update.
yeah, thank you
Miss
for that. Oh,
Mrs.
yes,
Page, are you
ahead.
reference? Sorry, Mr. Young.
No, please go ahead.
Mrs. Page, are you referencing the prior batch of properties that we brought to the board?
Yes.
Miss Lily is working on all the paperwork to submit that to the city.
Okay, so we don't have any update yet.
No, man, unless Miss Thompson has anything to add.
No, I do not. That is my understanding, the same as Mr. Cameron's.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Yeah, no, that was a good question. Very good question. My only other question regards, and again, this may be not right for asking, but do we have an idea of how much space? So at City Hall, if there's an opportunity to relocate some folks, what that will look like? I presumably that that would allow us to then downsize some of our portfolio or footprint at City Hall, or is it to retain the same amount? Do we have an idea as it relates to City Hall and what that will look like going forward?
We're working up some options, particularly with Clark Springs, most notably. It would reduce our footprint at City Hall. That doesn't help RPS in any particular way, mostly because we don't pay rent. So we have it gratis from the city. Also, my understanding is the long-term vision for the city is to vacate this building as well. So I think we're going to need a long-term plan elsewhere. And so I think a good temporary solution to that is a place like Clark Springs, Norrell. So bottom line is, yes, it will reduce our footprint. That doesn't help us too much other than help us make the transition out of City Hall.
Thank you. And are there other folks, like, for example, I know recall procurement, I know their office is located in that building just on the other side of the railroad tracks up there by Hermitage. And are there other persons that are being considered for relocation, in places where we do pay rent?
Michelle, anywhere else where we're actually paying rent?
To be honest, I didn't know we were paying rent at the Hermitage location. Bobby, do we?
No, the city's actually paying the rent for the Vatex building and for the facilities office that we're in. So that was the agreement that was made when we relocated from the boulevard to the two buildings now.
Yeah, I don't think we actually pay rent in any of our buildings right now. So I'm not sure that movement would be cost savings. I mean, there could ultimately be, efficiencies around work of bringing people together. But right now, I don't think there's a cost efficiency.
Other than the transportation site, which we just renewed the lease for 1 year.
Yeah.
Right. What other questions do we have relevant to either Norrell or to Clark Springs? Questions and/or observations, comments? If none, and I anticipate that this evening may be a brief meeting, I do want to inquire of the group if if it's the will of the body to, in our last, or perhaps it was two school board meetings ago, among other things, the school board approved that this group would take on the current technical center and add it to our portfolio of work to consider and evaluate. And wanted to just take a temperature check and inquire of everybody if be amenable to taking that up next month, in the month of June, and to do that in person over there at site at a date we can determine soon. Any thoughts on that? Anybody have anything they want to share? If not, I think that's going to be the plan of attack for the month of June.
I like that idea, though. I think the technical center does depend on what happens with the Philip Morris site. And I think we're not really considering, isn't that kind of out of our hands, the Philip Morris site? So if it's whatever happens to it, the Philip Morris site needs to be activated and usable. I mean, not whatever, but they're really close together.
Correct. That's right. Yeah, absolutely.
Though the board has voted to apply capital funding to the renovation of that site right after George Wythe. So it's second in the queue. So it is now formally ready to go. I would agree we shouldn't vacate the current site until that site's ready to go, but I do think evaluating it and teeing it up is going to be helpful.
Yeah. I agree.
Real quick,
Steph-
Yeah, this is Dawn again. The Philip Morris site, I'm a little confused why we are even discussing that, because the board did approve the superintendent's recommendation. So we do not want to mislead this group or the public regarding the intended use for that site.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, well said. Thank you for that. And Stephanie, yes, ma'am.
No, I just wanted to clarify, by Philip Morris, he is referring to the Altria site. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah.
Just
Any
says,
other-
it says Philip Morris on the smokestack.
Nick, I think I heard Nicole.
I'm sorry.
Or no, was that?
I was going to
Yes,
also ask, maybe in preparation for the June meeting, if we might get an updated Excel spreadsheet. We had way back when working off of a sheet of properties, and now that the board has made decisions on some, and there are also some on there that, like Raz was on there, or Summer Hill, which actually are in use. It might help us continue to narrow which other things need to be discussed by this group. Like, for example, the Ash Center, it looks like maybe the only one that we haven't completely discussed, but it might be helpful to just tighten up that spreadsheet and recirculate to see if we're kind of in finish line view of the goals of this group, which were to go down that list and provide context for the board to make recommendations on.
Yeah, thank you for that, Michelle.
I'll send it just top back of your inbox, and
Miss Lily and I can work on that.
okay, that'd be great. Thank you.
If
Thank
I
you so
may, Ms. Thompson, it would be super helpful for me anyway. I don't know about the rest of y'all, but if for every property we could have a column that indicates whether the board has taken action on the surplusing, the quit claim, and whether the paperwork has been submitted to the city, and whether the ordinance has been passed, officially receiving it, along with what would make me deliriously happy is if we can track down the actual paperwork so that we could have a file so we can stop circling around being like, did it happen? Did it not happen? What year? I don't know. And just say like, yes, it was surplus. It was quitclaimed. It went to the council. Here's the ordinance. It's done. It's the city's. Stop asking us about it. I would love that for every property on the list, or it hasn't been done. And so we know that's exactly what needs to be done.
And that's an excellent idea. So we won't keep having the same conversations over and over.
We can work on that. I can't guarantee by June just because our schedules, but we can definitely work on that.
How about next Wednesday?
Well, what maybe we could do by June is just have it broken down by property of has it been addressed or not? And then over the next 2 months, perhaps getting all of the detail references. But I think that would give this committee clear direction. There are 3 properties left to discuss and to present, or however many.
That's fine. We can work on that.
Thanks, Nicole. You're amazing. And for the benefit of the group, Michelle is correct. We are closing in on the finish line. It really is now just Arthur Ashe Center and now the technical center, because it's been included in our portfolio. And I see Ms. Burke referenced at the top of the hour. She had an obligation with Ms. Newbill, with Dr. Newbill. Ms. Burke, I think we're closing in on the end of the meeting, but would you like to address either the Norrell building or Clark Springs and or any of the conversation we just had relevant to process?
I'm not going to hold anyone up, but good evening, everyone. And I don't know, the Clark Springs piece, I thought we removed that from the list, correct? We did not remove we did remove Clark Springs from that list, correct?
We just had a conversation relevant to both Clark Springs and Norrell, and Michelle articulated that it's the administration's proposal to retain both of those properties.
Oh, well, Clark Springs most definitely, I can't think of a better, one of the best buildings built during that era. I don't know, well, it closed for whatever reason, as we well know, but I'm in a full agreement with that, I would like to say this was the 7th district meeting that I was a part of, and I guess maybe this would not be appropriate to share this time, but it's good news for Richmond Public Schools. So I'll wait until thumbs up completely. It was a great meeting,
Yeah.
but I did leave to join you all. So thank you so much, but it was a good meeting. I'm in full agreement with that. Very good.
Yes, ma'am. Thank
And I'll
you.
catch up with you later, Jonathan, to get the notes. You don't have to go back through everything. Thank you so much. And I'm glad we have a beautiful turnout this evening. Great. Thank you.
Any other questions?
One last
Uh,
question.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So in regards to what Mr. Cameras just mentioned, especially like housing of the paperwork and like the hard copies, the actual documents that I definitely support that. Where would all of that be housed? I'm just curious.
We can upload it all to Board Docs once we kind of, have it all put together. I could do like a formal presentation, and then it could, be housed there for perpetuity, so everybody can access it.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, good question. Good question. Any other business for the good of the order? If not, look for a note from me shortly, and it'll inquire about a date that works for everybody for the month of June. And Nicole, you had asked earlier about the weather in Stratford Hills, and it's the sun's still out. So
Fantastic. Thank you.
yes, ma'am. All right. Well,
Good night, everybody.
we are now adjourned.